Good evening, everybody. I hope you can hear me. Thank you very much for joining our donor appreciation event. You are the early ones, so thank you very much for logging in early. We really appreciate that. Before we get started, just to go through a couple of housekeeping things. My name is Renato Zane, and I'll be the moderator for this evening. Just make sure that you have your speakers working and that you've got the correct output selected. If you're not sure, you can test by clicking the arrow next to the microphone icon at the bottom left corner of your screen. Also, make sure your volume is turned up on your computer or device in case you can't hear me as I'm speaking now. We are going to be using the chat function this evening. Later on, we'll give you some information about how you can submit questions to our panelists. But before we get the evening underway, we thought that for those of you who are here waiting, we could try something a little bit fun. What we'd like to do is to maybe try some fun facts and do a little poll. We've got some questions for you that in case you're just sitting around waiting for this thing to start, we can do a little poll question. So the first question that we'd like to ask you is this one. If you could travel in time, would you prefer to go in the past or would you prefer to travel into the future? Log your answer and then we can take a look at the results in a couple of seconds here. So time travel back to the past or to the future? I'm not seeing any answers yet, but I'm sure we will get an update. Here we go. 73% of you prefer going into the future and only 27% into the past. Great. Well, thank you very much for that. We're going to talk a lot about the future this evening. Poll number 2. Would you rather be always overdressed or underdressed? Would you rather be always overdressed or underdressed? As we're heading into the winter months, it's a question that I ask myself all the time. Maybe you do too. Would you rather be overdressed or underdressed? Same in the summer, same question applies in the summer. So, or for a formal event or informal event, I guess. We'll see how you feel about this one. Overdressed. That would have been my pick too, 91%. It's always easier to remove layers than it is to go hunting for layers. All right, well, thank you very much for participating. Just a reminder that if you want to comment or share information, you can use the chat button down below. We will turn on the music for a few more minutes and we'll get ready to start momentarily, and we'll start with the formal introductions next. So thank you for playing along and thank you again for being here early. Really appreciate it. I'll be back in a second. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome everyone to this year's BC Schizophrenia Society's Foundation's Donor Appreciation event. My name is Renato Zane, and I'm the volunteer chair with the BC Schizophrenia Society Foundation Board, and I'll be your moderator this evening. Today, I happen to be joining you from the traditional territory of the Indigenous peoples of southwestern Ontario. I'm traveling, but I want to recognize that the BC Schizophrenia Society and the BC Schizophrenia Society Foundation work and support people across our beautiful province of British Columbia, with much of the work situated on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, primarily those of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And we are thrilled that this virtual event can reach people across British Columbia and beyond. This event is our opportunity to thank you for your generosity and to show you how your donations have made a difference to families affected by schizophrenia and serious mental illness. We are extremely grateful for the support of our sponsor, the Otsuka Lundbeck Alliance. Through their support, not one single donor dollar was diverted from our programs to pay for this event tonight. Through their support over the years, it means that donors and families alike are able to learn more about schizophrenia, its impacts, what treatments are available, and the research that is happening. Today, we're looking forward to learning about an exciting area of brain research. I know you will enjoy hearing from and engaging with our speakers today. You're going to be hearing from Phaedra Aldridge, Chief Executive Officer of the BC Schizophrenia Society, Dr. Todd Woodward, Professor, Department of Psychiatry, University of British Columbia, and Director of the UBC Cognitive Neuroscience of Schizophrenia Laboratory. There he is. And Dr. Rafal Skiba, postdoctoral researcher, Department of Psychiatry at the University of British Columbia. But above all, this event is about you, our donors. We are so very grateful for your support, and we hope that you will notice your name on the screen during tonight's virtual event. As you know, the mandate of the foundation is to raise funds in support of the British Columbia Schizophrenia Society, including its family support programs, advocacy, and education. The foundation supports much needed society programs and also provides funds to support scientific research about schizophrenia. Before I introduce Phaedra for her update, I'd like to recognize the volunteers who serve on the foundation board with me. They are Joanne Leung, Margareta Dovgal, Guelda Regman, and Alec Logan. Thank you so much. And of course, I'd like to thank all of the staff of the society who are volunteering their time with us this evening as well. For the last 6 years, former board member Chris Sandy has supported this fall campaign. And in each of these years, he has made the offer to personally match donations up to a total of $10,000. He does this in memory of his younger brother, Dave. If you're not familiar with Dave's story, you can read all about it in Chris's letter on the BCSS Foundation website. We are honestly deeply honored and appreciative to Chris for his commitment, for serving on our board for 6 years, and for his overall dedication to our cause with his generous donations. We really applaud him. Thank you so much, Chris. Your gifts have made it possible for BCSS staff to provide support and education to hundreds of families every year. Demand for services continues to grow right across the province, and BCSS is constantly adapting to meet the needs. This year is also a very important anniversary year for the Society, but I'm going to let Phaedra Aldridge, the CEO of the BC Schizophrenia Society, tell you more about that and a lot of other stuff as well. So here she is. Over to you, Phaedra.
Great. Thanks very much, Renato. And hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here tonight with us. And as Renato said, my name is Phaedra Aldridge. So the purpose of today's event is to celebrate and to thank you for everything that we've been able to do as a team. As I always say, we're not able to accomplish anything unless we do it together. So just thank you for all your support this year. Now, BCSS, as we all know, is extremely unique. We are focused on chronic and persistent mental illnesses, and we support families across the entire province. Now, some of our core programs, Strengthening Families Together, which has recently been revised with the help of our staff team, the board, and our medical advisory board. We have our BCSS family support groups, our one-on-one support for families, as well as working with our younger generation through our teens and kids in control programs. We also provide education through our podcasts, our videos, our website, social media to increase awareness about serious mental illness, as well as to decrease the stigma that, as we all know, still exists today. I'm so truly grateful for all of the support that BCSS has received this past year. And I'd like to specifically thank Asuka Lungbat for its support for this event. Thank you, Asuka. And to both boards, who are all volunteer directors, thank you. Thank you for the dedication and for volunteering your time to help move BCSS forward. And thank you to my amazing team. All the frontline educators who work directly with our families, our regional managers, we have 6 of them, as well as the entire provincial office team. I couldn't do it without you. And I truly am grateful for all your support and everything that you do for our organization, which in turn directly supports our families, which is the most important thing. So thank you. And a huge thank you to you, our donors. Thank you for your advocacy, writing letters, all of your emails that we receive, and thank you for your financial support as well. We had over 1,000 new families this year alone that reached out to our organization. And the only reason that we were able to accommodate all of these families was because of the support from you and all of our other donors. So thank you so much for your support and your continued support. And this year is a very special year. 40 years BCSS has been in existence, which just shows that we are not only dedicated, but also a very long-standing organization. And we plan to be here for another 40 plus years with your support. So thank you again. And I truly appreciate you being here, spending your time, your valuable time with us tonight, but also all of your support through the entire year. As I said, we cannot do it alone. So thank you for being here. And I am so truly, truly grateful for each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Phaedra, for reminding us about how we as donors are all making a difference in the lives of families affected by schizophrenia. But also thank you for all the work that you're doing as CEO and the way that you're leading the team. I know that the 1,000 new families that are reaching out to us are really appreciative of that as well. Your professionalism is really great. Thank you. Each year, we launch our annual campaign with the story of a family's journey with schizophrenia. You will soon receive a letter in the mail with the remarkable story of Julie Skippen and her family. Julie was one of the founding members of the Sunshine Coast branch. Julie has 2 sons with schizophrenia and is one of the she's one of the founders of the Sunshine Coast branch, as I was saying, but also she did this way back when the society was in its infancy, and Dr. Norma Calder gathered families together to help other families. I'm sure you will find her story riveting. It highlights the essential nature of the Society's work in British Columbia and how it unites donors, staff, and families in an extended network of understanding. I personally would like to thank Julie, her daughter Lori, and her entire family for taking the time to share their journey with us. It's not an easy thing to open up to everyone in this way, and we're very grateful that Julie agreed to share her story with us. As you know, the BCSS Foundation is also invested in unlocking the mysteries of schizophrenia, its causes and treatments. You, the donors, have made it possible through the gifts that you have designated specifically for research. Through our partnership with the Michael Smith Health Research BC organization, qualified research projects are selected through a thorough and professional evaluation process. Eligible projects are also co-funded by Michael Smith Health Research BC and by us, by the BCSS Foundation. So in essence, your donation dollars are matched and make an even greater impact there as well. We're very pleased this evening that Munira Kassam, the Manager of Partnerships for Michael Smith Health Research BC, is joining us this evening and is following this webcast. Thank you very much, Munira. This year, the Foundation and Health Research BC announced 3 new jointly funded projects. Back in February, we announced a 5-year award in the Health Professional Investigator category for UBC's Dr. Ivan Torres for his project investigating neuropsychological functioning in treatment-resistant schizophrenia. In July, we announced 2 3-year research trainee projects. One for Dr. Beneth Ben Azu of the University of Victoria, who will study the link between the gut microbiome and microglial cells in the brain, and another for UBC's Carly McGee for a study on the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on access to adequate care for serious mental disorders in British Columbia. Well, now it's time for me to introduce our speakers for tonight. It's my pleasure to introduce you to our feature guests, and they are Dr. Todd Woodward and Dr. Rafael Skiba. Welcome, gentlemen. We are so pleased that you can be with us tonight. Allow me to introduce you. There's Dr. Todd Woodward, and thank you so much. Dr. Todd Woodward is a professor of the Department of Psychiatry, University of British Columbia, and also the director of the UBC Cognitive Neuroscience of Schizophrenia Laboratory. He was an early recipient of some funding from the BCSS Foundation and honestly never looked back, driving ever forward in his focus in trying to understand the human brain. We'll hear more about his professional journey during tonight's presentation. Dr. Rafał Skiba is a postdoctoral researcher in the Department of Psychiatry at the University of British Columbia. He moved here from Poland specifically to work with Dr. Woodward. You can read more about him in our article that we have on our research section of the website, bcssfoundation.org. Dr. Skiba has studied in several different institutions, including in New York City, in Berlin, Germany, and at the Swiss Center for Effective Science at the University of Geneva. He has a passion for understanding mental disorders with a specific focus on brain science and neural mechanisms. Doctors Woodward and Skiba are happy to answer questions after their presentation this evening. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can, so be sure to get your questions in early. Please only use the Q&A window, not the chat box, to submit your question for the end of the presentation. So use the Q&A window for the questions that you want to ask the doctors. The Q&A button is right below, so you can find it on your screen. You may have to move your cursor if you can't see it. All right, so let's begin. Dr. Woodward and Dr. Skiba, over to you.
Thank you, Renato, for the very nice introduction. It's a real pleasure to address you all today. Hopefully you can see that slide. So yeah, there is a long history between this whole research program and the BC Schizophrenia Society, which started as the Dr. Norma Calder Foundation, which actually a student at the University of Victoria, where I was a graduate student, was awarded a little bit of funding from the Dr. Norma Calder Foundation, and she hired me to do the analysis of her data, which was on symptoms of schizophrenia, which she told me would classify as delusions and hallucinations go together, negative symptoms go together like flat affect and reduced spontaneous speech, and thought disorder symptoms would go together like difficulty communicating. And so that's exactly what happened with that data analysis. And ever since I was fascinated by the symptoms of schizophrenia and why certain symptoms tend to co-occur, and realized, of course, that brain networks must be common to those symptoms. And so that later I actually applied to the Norma Calder Foundation for funding for a postdoctoral fellowship at Riverview Hospital and was awarded that. And I felt like the donors of what was the Dr. Norma Calder Foundation, now is the BC Schizophrenia Society, has somehow selected me and put their faith in me to produce a research program on schizophrenia right here in the Lower Mainland. So through that funding, I was able to be successful with the research program, and then won some salary awards and was able to actually get on faculty in UBC psychiatry. So from the University of Victoria to the University of British Columbia, and moving forward, there's a lot in between, a lot of publications and a lot of new treatment programs. We are now, and we have some hardware that's being used for not only investigating brain activity, but also stimulating brain activity. And Rafał Skiba, Dr. Skiba, had applied to work with me on that project, and that hardware was partially funded by the BC Schizophrenia Society. So the whole process of where we started and where we end up now was due in a major way to the BC Schizophrenia Society. So we're very appreciative of the opportunity we've been given, and hopefully I feel like we're working together as a team to try to reduce the suffering that comes along with this with schizophrenia. So let me start with a slide. It looks complicated, but it's actually not. So we have different levels that we can understand schizophrenia. So at the highest level, and the one that's probably most familiar to us, is the level of symptoms. So examples of those symptoms I already talked about: delusions, hallucinations, hearing voices, communication problems where the speech can be difficult to understand, or people might get off topic. Reduced type of motivation or reduced movement are all aspects of schizophrenia that come and go with time. So sometimes Delusions may be strong and other times not. So obviously there's some types of brain networks that are changing, that are causing the change in these symptoms. And so that's sort of the highest level, but what's underneath? So we know that there's a genetic component to schizophrenia. We know that those genes produce the smallest building blocks of biology to form a brain. And in the neurons in the brain, the communication between the neurons take place in gaps called neurotransmitters are chemicals that pass those gaps. And that's the level of neurotransmitters, and that's, as you know, where medication works. So we have this level of treatment that's probably the most common treatment for, and very valuable treatment for schizophrenia. So through this level, we're actually able to affect symptoms and reduce the severity of symptoms using affecting the neurotransmitters only. But what about these two levels in between? So we have the next level. Well, actually the easiest level probably to understand is this level, the level of brain connections and networks. So there are certain configurations of brain networks that do certain things. And sometimes when those brain networks are not functioning well, then we can end up with symptoms, so that this dysfunction at the level of brain ends up producing symptoms that may be severe or less severe at certain times. But there's yet another level that's so often ignored and is very, very important. And that's the level of the function. So what is the function of these networks? And how is it that these functions, when impaired, can result in these types of symptoms? So this is really the level of psychology here. So what types of functions do each of these brain networks actually carry out? So as you can see, we do all of our work at these levels here, at the level of symptoms, psychological functions, and this is also called cognitive functions or thinking. What is the type of thought processes or cognitive processes carried out by these brain networks, and here. So when I was at the University of Victoria, we were working at this level of symptoms and looking at which symptoms cluster together. And then when we had our position at Riverview Hospital, that program is largely about understanding the types of thinking or cognitive processes that underlie the symptoms. And during that time, we developed, well, by understanding, for example, that delusions are types of beliefs that are difficult for people to give up. So we developed some tests that look at the ability of people to integrate evidence against a belief. I found out that people with delusions have difficulty integrating evidence into a number of different beliefs, not just the one that is of concern to the medical community or their family. And so by teaching people that, and this sort of reduces stigma as well, by teaching people the thought processes that we all actually share but become exaggerated in schizophrenia, it turned out that we were able to actually relieve symptoms. And that is called, that we have a title for that program, is called metacognitive training. So metacognitive training actually teaches people what all our thought processes are, and learning about how to integrate evidence, what it means to be certain about something. And then we start to be aware that we can actually doubt our thoughts. And then what ends up happening, those tools are actually can be applied and eventually jump the bridge to be applied to delusions. And we found that even after 2 months of treatment, 3 years later, you can measure a reduction in symptoms. But metacognitive training, even though that was developed at Riverview through the support of the BC Schizophrenia Society, it's been translated into 33 languages, published in top journals, and is used all around the world. We have two other ways to actually affect this level. So even though metacognitive training affects the level of thinking, it probably also affects, and that thinking may also affect the brain networks. So if we can get sort of a permanent adjustment of those brain networks, we learn certain new skills that can help us cope with fixed false beliefs, for example, then we can see a reduction at this level as well. And then there's these other words. Cognitive behavioral therapy is also working at this level of psychology and talking with people about, not about the way people think and what the general thinking patterns are, but about that person's specific belief system. So it's focused on the individual. And then cognitive rehabilitation also works at the level of psychology, but more focusing on memory, memory weaknesses, attention weaknesses, and really working people through those types of cognitive functions that are more fundamental that we recognize every day, like how to remember things, how do we pay attention, how do we organize our day. So what Rafael and I have been working on lately is correlations between this level of cognition, which can be measured with psychological tests, and the severity of symptoms. So which of these aspects of cognition are correlated with which of these symptoms? That's one sort of focus of our research. But another focus is and the title of this presentation is New Ways of Understanding and Changing Symptoms of Schizophrenia. The new ways really have to do with this level. We've accomplished a lot at this level. We've developed treatment programs at this level. There are 3 different ways to impact the psychology level that can also impact symptoms or everyday functioning. But the next frontier is probably this level. We have ways to affect this level. We have ways to affect this level. So this is neurotransmitters, this is cognitive functions. This is very, very difficult to understand the healthy brain and the way the normal brain works. We work a lot on that, understanding what those networks are and how they result in certain cognitive functions, and also how they, when they're becoming dysfunctional, how they manifest as symptoms. So what Rafael and my lab is working on these days is understanding how we can modulate those brain networks using small impulses of electricity on the scalp, hardly even perceptible, but they do change the probability that neurons will fire at certain frequencies. And so once we understand what the frequencies are that we want to impact and which brain networks affect which symptoms, then we hope to be able to move forward with this this electrical type of modulation. TMS is using magnetic impact on the scalp, and that also changes the likelihood and actually causes certain neurons to fire. So the new ways of understanding and changing symptoms depends a lot on our level of understanding of what these brain networks are and how they manifest as symptoms. And so I think I'll just leave the rest to discussion now. And I just want to again say thanks to the BC Schizophrenia Society for supporting. This is sort of like 20 years of research that's been majorly funded by BC Schizophrenia Society. So thanks to the donors. And Rafael, let him explain a little more about this.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Todd. So I would like to welcome everyone. It's a great honor to be here, and I'm here for your support. And today I would like to tell you more about our techniques of neuromodulating the working brain. As you may know, human brain consists of 86 billion of neurons, and anytime we want to do something, want to think about something, those neurons need to exchange information, and the exchange of information occurs through process of depolarization and hyperpolarization of electric fields between the neurons, and that's why through this electric current that we have in the brain, those neurons can communicate. So it's a good idea to also think about the brain like communication between two cities through power transmission towers that send alternate current between two cities. And if we can go to the next slide, please. If I know Todd has the slides. Oh, thank you. And so when this communication happens, it happens on different frequencies. So neurons oscillate, like this current between neurons oscillate differently depending on what we're doing. And for example, when we're learning something, that's typical for gamma frequency, that's 32 to 100 hertz. When we get excited about something, that's when the beta oscillations comes to play, so 13 to 32 hertz. When we get relaxed and when we start to focusing on something and we get really relaxed, that's alpha frequency, so 8 to 13 hertz. In the states of deep meditation or dreaming, that's the theta. And for example, when we're sleeping, that's the time of delta oscillations. And can we move to the next slide? Thank you. So having this knowledge now about the electricity and those different rates of connection, the message that I would like to tell you now that we have this technology in our lab that allow us to influence oscillations. And that method is called transcranial alternating current stimulation. And here is an example of the equipment that we use. So it's this this cup with 256 electrodes, and using current to stimulate brain is nothing new. Like probably most of you heard about electroconvulsive therapy, but that is very different in terms of magnitude. If a CT uses like 50 milliamps, here we are dealing with 1.8. So it's a totally safe. It's non-invasive, and a person it can be totally awake when performing tasks and when receiving stimulation. So in case of the TACS, we the current alternates like you can see on this example here, from positive to negative, and through like induction of this alternating current, we can actually affect the electric field in the neuron, and that can lead to enhancement or entrainment of certain frequency. And the other very cool feature about this system is that we can actually target brain areas that we know through our research and through literature reviews that some certain cognitive function are associated with that part of the brain, and we can focus on that part of the brain and induce current. And through experimentation right now, we try to decide what type of protocols are most effective using this equipment, because our goal is to very reliably induce current in order to reduce symptoms of schizophrenia through cognitive acceleration. So if, like from the research that Todd just mentioned, we know that they are central symptoms that are associated with certain cognitive function, like working memory or our ability to remember words or paying attention. So we can imagine that if we can enhance cognitive processing through transcranial alternating current stimulation, we can hope to reduce certain symptoms. And once again, I would like to thank you because my award from Michael Smith was granted also from your support, and I'm very excited about this research and more projects that we're doing with Todd. We don't have time to talk about all of them, but this is the main one. And I will finish now, and I hope to hear some questions from you. Thank you.
Great. Thank you both. I don't know if you can hear me. Am I? Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Rafal and Dr. Todd. That's really interesting. I do have a couple of questions to get us started, and I'll ask you, Dr. Rafal, first, and then I'll ask a question of Dr. Woodward. But I just wanted to make sure that people are able to leave questions on the screen. Please, if you're having an issue with writing your questions in the Q&A section, please send a note in the chat so that someone can take a look at it and be aware. But in the meantime, let me just start off the questions with you, Dr. Skiba. I was just curious about what was it about Dr. Woodward's lab that made you want to leave Europe and come to British Columbia to conduct your research here?
I after my postdoc in Geneva, I was really interested into focus myself on helping others, and I found this startup in Berlin where they were developing also some form of neuromodulation to help depression. And when I saw that ad of Professor Woodward, and I was like fascinated that because I couldn't find before in my career like this path of really like using research to directly or somehow help people. And then when I read more about Professor Woodward's work, that he's actually doing that, right? He studies the brain, but also is developing programs to help others, for example, metacognitive training. And that way I decided that I would like to join him, that I would like to just help him and be part of what he's doing.
Fantastic. Yeah, well, welcome. We're so happy that you're here. Dr. Woodward, you and I had a chance to speak a couple of days ago, and what came through in your comments, for me at least, is a kind of sense of optimism you have about working with patients who have serious mental illness. You indicate that patients are willing to engage in some of these cognitive exercises that Dr. Skiba was talking about, and they seem to be doing this without too much resistance. How do you achieve that? Or maybe you could just share with us your experience in working with people who have serious mental disorders.
Right. So what that refers to is we have a network of schizophrenia researchers across Canada who've been getting together and discussing ways that we can increase our chances of getting funding from the Tri-Council agencies. So the Canadian government has 3 different agencies that we can apply to funding for. And we found out that, well, through all of the reviews and kind of talking with each other, we found out that people have some misperceptions about what it must be like to study, do research involving people with schizophrenia, where, we'd get reviews that said things like, well, if these people are so unwell, how can they do any cognitive testing, or how can they sit in a brain scanner? And I mean, when I was, before I'd done any research on schizophrenia, I was concerned about the same thing. But, I think in general, people with schizophrenia, when you ask them to take part and do things, they're actually quite good about it and can concentrate fairly well. It's just that when you start talking to them about the issues that are of concern to them and their family, that, that's when you start to see and start to experience that life is, can be challenging sometimes, depending on the severity of the symptoms. But I mean, I did a lot of research at Riverview Hospital with some very, very ill people, and they just love taking part in the research. And sometimes they'd see, you've got anything more for me? I just need to do some more research, and nothing right now, So I think they just like that relationship where, they're treated in a way where they're the bosses for that time, and they're told, anytime you want to quit, you can just go ahead and do that, and we really appreciate your time. And they sometimes get a little bit of money too, and yeah, I think they're perfectly capable of doing it, even for surprisingly long sessions, even hours of sessions. They're very good at keeping focus on that time, and I think it's a different relationship for them that they enjoy.
Well, that's really interesting. I would have liked to have visited Riverview back when you were doing research there. I think so many of us are interested in how things were actually working there. We have a question from our audience, and it's again for you, Todd. And it goes like this. Your work recognizes a key role of genes in the development of schizophrenia. This is also a common understanding in mainstream psychiatry. However, this belief doesn't seem to be as widespread in the field of psychology. Instead, this field and other helping professions seem often to be more focused on the social determinants of mental illness. What do you think that is? Or why do you think that is?
Let me show that slide again. So we look at these levels. So actually, I don't do any work at the level of genes, even though that's in my slide, because that is a component of schizophrenia. And then the question was,
Yeah.
sorry, repeat the question.
Yeah, of course. So the question was, in psychology and other helping professions, they seem to be more focused on the social determinants of mental illnesses.
When there's a long question, let's take it in each part because we have lots of time, right?
Yeah.
So when we're talking about psychology, we're talking about this level, the level of brain functions. So psychology doesn't have to mean social, right? Psychology can mean looking at your own thoughts. In fact, that's the whole basis of cognitive behavioral therapy. And so, yeah, the study of the types of thought processes that lead to symptoms, and so hallucinations can be managed with cognitive behavioral therapy. Delusions can be managed with cognitive behavioral therapy or metacognitive training, but not by talking about, sort of social training and training about social skills, but actually saying to somebody, how are we certain about anything? And the way metacognitive training works is we show people scenarios and we have them interpret those scenarios, and we have a group of people, can be 10 people or 5 people, and we talk about what we understand that scenario to be. And then we show, things aren't always as they first appear, and then start showing more information. And it's fun for people in the group as they realize, things aren't always as they first appear. And of course, this overlaps with social, because social situations are never really that clear, right? And so, it's very easy for us to see, wow, I thought that person didn't like me, but it turned out they're shy, right? Or I thought that person didn't like me and that's why they didn't show up to a date, but it turns out they missed the bus or forgot or whatever. And so, when we start to realize that we can doubt our beliefs, then that is, a way we can develop skills to change the way we think about lots of different things. So anyway, what else was there in that question?
No, I think that was it. The question was why so much focus on the social determinants, but what I think you've explained is that there are many levels of in which the illness manifests and can be addressed or attacked, I guess. And so I think you've talked about the brain function as well as the neural networks and all of the work that is required on all of these fronts.
Yeah, and I mean, social skills can be partly due to the way we think about that social situation. So thinking styles, different biases that we have about the way the world is, and some of them are affected in schizophrenia. Like, for example, how much are we willing to integrate evidence against our belief? That's not necessarily a social thing. If you're not talking to someone about it, it can be just something that's important for, your everyday thoughts to yourself too.
Okay. Right. Thanks. We'll move quickly to another question so we can get as many of these in as we can. The question goes like this, and it's, however you want to field it, whether you want to do this one, Dr. Woodward or Dr. Skiba. The question is, are you working exclusively with refractory schizophrenia patients? Are patients hospitalized, or are some living in the community?
I'll answer that. Well, I mean, in the past, we were working at Riverview, as you know, so that a lot of that work was done with inpatients. But since then, we were doing a lot of brain imaging studies where people actually had to come to UBC, which is was difficult from Riverview. So mostly people living in the community and that are in contact with the mental health teams. That's where most of the people get involved in.
Okay. Next question. Is it possible that an electrostimulation therapy akin to the deep brain stimulation technique, which has helped in alleviation of some symptoms of Parkinson's, could be beneficial in the control of schizophrenia symptoms?
I can answer this one. Deep brain stimulation is well, it is quite new techniques in application to mental disorders. So far, the most work is done with obsessive compulsive disorder, and there are patients. There are reports of patients of that. I'm aware of reports from Johns Hopkins about patients with paranoid schizophrenia that had also form of OCD, and they are promising. But we are talking about like patients that I can count, like reports of like a few patients. So is quite new. It is promising. The thing is that it is a still treatment more into realms of electroconvulsive therapy rather than very specific way of treating a brain that we can do with tags. But like I said, from my perspective, the person who just reads about it at this point, it is promising, but only we so far there are only a few like cases that about that. But of course, it is exciting.
Okay, great, thank you. I'd like to just ask another one about metacognitive training, and the question is, how do pharmaceuticals, namely medications, in the body affect the results of metacognitive training?
Well, we've never really had very many people involved in metacognitive training that are not on medication, and I think that's helpful. So there's never been any research done on interaction, except, you know, it's better in groups if people are well, and people will be more likely to be well when they're on medication. So everybody who's involved in the studies we've completed were on medication. I think all of them. Okay.
It seems that the work that you have to do in mapping brain networks, it must be incredibly complex. How do you approach that task as you try to understand how the brain works and what kind of stimulation could have an impact on an illness like schizophrenia? Could you just describe for us that process? To me, it would seem like it would be a long process, but
it is a long process. We're now, I would say, on the cutting edge of fMRI research. So fMRI is different than EEG. So fMRI doesn't actually measure the neural network, the activity of neurons directly. It measures blood flow around the brain. That took 22 years of pretty intense work to what I think now is quite a full understanding of what fMRI can offer. And with EEG, it's much more complicated. As Rafal already mentioned, we're talking about 86 billion neurons all firing at different frequencies. So to gain the level of understanding we have about the brain that we've achieved with fMRI, with EEG, I don't see any reason why it wouldn't be around the same amount of time, but I'm willing to try, you know, Rafal as well. Well, someone's got to do it.
Good. Well, have you seen an impact of computing power in this kind of work that you do? Do you use supercomputers, or is it all something that you have to map with humans?
Well, fMRI hasn't, and EEG really has been achievable on not necessarily huge computers. But the thing is now, well, back in the day, everyone was very possessive of their data, but now everyone's sharing their data, so you can actually download massive data sets. So it's really exciting, but we can't handle it on our lab computers anymore, and we have to, UBC has supercomputers available for us now. So yeah, we're moving towards that. So it's perfect timing.
Yeah, so let's hope it won't be 22 more years
yeah.
for this aspect. Okay, another question for you. Yes, it's in relation to what we were just talking about. What do you think are the biggest obstacles in research looking forward? 20 years, this person is saying 20 years is certainly a long time. So what are the biggest obstacles in your view?
You want to go ahead, Rafael? I've been answering a lot.
Okay, well, there are actually a few, like from a perspective of young researchers, it's there are, you know, we are in this era of like, I don't want to talk about finances, but that's always a problem if we want to go like for ambitious projects. I mean, like for example, let's do study. Let's do a new study testing neuromodulation and metacognitive training on the hundreds of people, because that's how we get a really reliable result. And for that, we need a lot of fundings that only, for example, your foundation cannot basically do that. So I think that Todd also can mention that, but obtaining funding, like, you know, like I see Todd is writing grants like couple weeks per month. I mean, like, it's constantly, you know. And what I'm saying, I think that is some problem here, because it would be, I think, great if, for example, people like Todd could spend more time like thinking about new experiments than writing grants, right? So I think that's a problem that I can see, and I can try to train myself under Todd to develop those skills of writing and be able to get grants. But that's what I see as a young researcher. You know, what like you would like to add something to it?
Well, I mean, no, I think we pretty much covered.
Well, I know that you're an expert, you know, applicant for funding. I know you've as Dr. Skiba was saying, you do write a lot of those applications. We will be wrapping up very shortly, so I just want to give everyone a last opportunity to ask any questions if you have any. And just before we do wrap up, I wanted to ask Dr. Skiba, when you applied for this research trainee position, you identified 3 different phases of your research project. And could you just briefly tell us what phase of your project you're in now? And you know, I think people will be interested in hearing what the 3rd phase is specifically, but could you just quickly identify the 3 phases?
Yes, so there are 3 phases to my projects. What we generally want is to identify in the first phase. So we want to identify frequencies and brain networks responsible for accumulating evidence in brains of patients suffering from schizophrenia, and we are in the process of analyzing like hundreds of data sets of electroencephalography data. So that is a measurement that gives us those oscillations that I was talking about, of people who actually went through metacognitive training, and they are
and cognitive remediation, don't forget.
And cognitive and like other cognitive therapy, and when they were asked to do tasks that measure that measure their bias to jump to conclusion, and also confirmatory biases. And we, in this phase, we measuring, like we analyzing those data, and at the same time we actually start the phase 2. So the phase 2, we are testing our transcranial alternate current stimulation systems that we have here. And we develop protocols to verify which montage. So, for example, montage by montage, I mean which electrode we use from this net of 256 are most effective in inducing current. And for that goal, we just finished building a new laboratory here at BC Children's Hospital, and we now have the system now working, and so we actually now start testing protocols to verify if system is working. So the second phase, we will recruit a group of students of UBC students and verify if we can modulate the frequencies that we know from our analysis of the first phase. And the third phase that we are going to, that we will be probably seeking much support, it is quite ambitious, because we would like to basically recruit 150 patients suffering from schizophrenia, and then have different groups, and one of those group will do metacognitive training, which is a 6-week training that Todd mentioned. That will be also receiving this neuromodulation protocols. And then we will compare to the groups that didn't receive the metacognitive training, but receive the stimulation and the wait list control. That's the goal that is for us for the next year, to start applying for funding to get to that point. But now we are like finishing this phase 1 and starting phase 2.
I think that many of our donors will be very excited in hearing about that phase 3. That sounds really interesting, and we hope you get the funding that you're looking for. So we'll just have one more question, and it's for you, Dr. Todd. And so I know that you oversee a number of projects in your lab. What's next for you specifically, and your own research? What are you focused on looking ahead to the next year? What's top of your list?
Well, I mean, various things, but you know, what I've been describing, it's hard to really communicate the vastness of all of this work and how it's actually coming to fruition right now, like in the next couple of years. And the way it's coming to fruition is all of the ways that we developed all those different tasks to you know, correlate with delusions and find out what the thinking patterns are that underlie those symptoms, and then discovering the brain networks that, you know, and I said that took a long time to actually nail down how to measure what fMRI offers. And now we've discovered, and we're the first in the world to recognize this, the brain networks that are retrievable from fMRI in these tasks. And so now we're actually going back through all the data we've collected over the past 20 years and reanalyzing it with these new methods, and then quantifying the brain activity, quantifying all the symptoms of schizophrenia that we have, trying to correlate them. So finally, after all these years, and I've been mentioning sort of 20 years of work that started with the Dr. Norma Calder Foundation in 1999, we're actually at the point now where we can take all the data we have and finally effectively correlate the brain activity with symptoms. So this is what the whole point was the whole time. And besides, along the way, developing a new treatment for schizophrenia, metacognitive training, we'll finally be able to get a solid answer about what the brain networks are that are underlying symptoms. And it may depend on which task people are carrying out. Some networks might be correlated with certain symptoms under task A, but not task B. So the whole lab is kind of focused on you know, achieving that goal.
Fantastic. Well, it certainly sounds like we've come full circle, starting with Dr. Norma Calder. It's the 40th anniversary of the society. and you're on the verge of making significant progress after all these years. So thank you so much to both of you. And just in closing, I'd like to say that, obviously it's a fascinating topic, and if anyone has any questions that they didn't get a chance to ask, please send them in to us. We will collect the questions and forward them to Dr. Woodward and Dr. Skiba, who will do their best to answer them for you. So on behalf of all of the donors and the BC Schizophrenia Society Foundation, thank you so much to both of you for your presentation and for answering our questions. It's really exciting to have had a glimpse at the leading edge of research in what's happening with brain networks. If you'd like to review any part of this discussion, we will be sharing a summary, a video, and a transcript of today's event on our websites. That's bcss.org and bcssfoundation.org. We'll also be emailing you a link, so you don't really need to do anything. You can just click a link when you receive it from us. Basically, as we wrap up our time together, I'd like to once again thank our sponsor for today's virtual event, the Otsuka-Lundbeck Alliance, who have allowed us to organize this without dipping into your valuable donations. Before you leave, just a moment to let you know that we will probably be sending you a survey that will pop up as you leave. Your comments will help us to improve future events, and we really greatly appreciate that. In general, thank you so much for your fantastic support. We're truly grateful. Have a great evening. Please keep an eye out for that letter that I referred to featuring Julie Skippen and the early days of the Dr. Norma Calder Foundation and Chris Sandy's appeal. We're excited about your support and what BCSS does and for all of the work that is happening here in the community of British Columbia. Finally, enjoy the holiday season, and please, let's stay in touch. Thank you so much. Bye, everybody.